VJ, brother from the ancient mud, the Headspace, South Africa's most poignant hip-hop channel, where we bring you the best and sometimes the worst of what South Africa has to offer right now when it comes to this beautiful thing we love called hip-hop. I'm talking about the best and the worst. If you've been following this channel for a while, you'll know that I have a hang-up with the term female MC. I don't think the designation is useful for anything other than being a tool of oppression, because I think the art form of rap is something that doesn't move in the context of gender and sexuality. I think when you're talking about people's voices and their ability to project their emotions onto musical pieces, the fact whether they're a girl or a boy or in between doesn't fucking matter. And it doesn't make sense to me why we should label people and gender them when it comes to their art. It's like, ugh, you know? It's weird for me. And I think it comes from a place where, because rap grew in a fundamental place where it was built by a hyper-masculine spirit. And I said rap, not hip-hop, because for those who know their homework, the actual first ever hip-hop block party was hosted by Kool Herc's sister. So if we're gonna talk into the presence of women in hip-hop, it's not even gonna be on some angle of doing the politics of feminism. It's just playing out real stories of people hanging out with each other. And the fact that we've had this emphasis on women as unique specimens as rappers is also in itself an expression of just how the game is ran by men who can't see beyond their own phallus and their own egos. Why am I talking like this? StaticFlo, hailing all the way from GQ, so she's a homegirl, is an MC, period, who has cemented herself as one of the most hard-working lyricists in the game. This is somebody who's been at it now for a little over a decade. She's been rapping for a long time, and I think she comes from that ilk of the female MC who was groomed in the 90s, and this quote-unquote female MC who found themselves having to navigate this male-dominated world in order just to be recognized. So I, for one, wants to start off by saying that the way in which we can move and grow as a culture is by getting rid of that term. A rapper is a rapper is a rapper. If we get rid of terms like female MC, B-girl, then we'll start understanding that the skill isn't about whether or not you have a penis or a vagina. It really is centered on your experiences. I'm not saying these things count for nothing. I'm saying the art is not determined by them. You hear somebody's experiences as they speak and relay themselves. So yes, it is very interesting to hear things from the aspect and from the perspective of somebody who happens to be female, but it isn't what their art is about. You get me? Their art is not about them being female. Their art is about them, and they happen to be female. So just as the same way that we don't go and say the art of, I don't know, freaking Ricky Rick was about him being a man first. No, it was about him being a lover of the culture, an entrepreneur, an aspiring pop figure who grew to heights that inspired us all. And the fact that he was a dude was just around the embodiment of who he was as a person. So again, in embodying yourself, StaticFlo brings us this project called IPHUPHA, the dream. And what she basically goes into here is an expose of her journey in hip-hop. And the reason I had to start with that whole, you know, there are no female and male rappers, just rappers diatribe, is because she talks about this struggle. And she talks about this struggle of having to navigate so much difficulty in the game just because you have a pussy. And the fact that you might be better than most of these niggas, the fact that you might out-rap a whole lot of them, doesn't count for much ultimately, because you'll always be seen as a token female rapper, and you'll at the very best be the dopest female MC. Now it doesn't become an all-inclusive space where we judge people according to their scale. All of a sudden with women it's different. When you're dope as a woman, there's a dopeness for women. Huh? Dope is dope is dope. And what StaticFlo does here is that she introduces us to her dopeness. Her dopeness lies in the fact that she was a hip-hop dancer, transformed into a rapper, and she understands the game from so many different perspectives. The entrepreneurship. She's hustled herself into a place where she uses that very same decoy of female rap to create a womanist movement in re-engineering the way we see women in hip-hop, through having a movement called Women in Hip Hop. And I think this movement, if you follow it, has really done strides in putting across platforms where the women in hip hop can speak and hopefully they can be listened to. Because the complex issue of gender in South Africa is one that rears itself with a very ugly head. We're a country that has some of the highest rates of abuse committed on feminine bodies. And I think what this is an expression of so many different things, but ultimately it's an expression of this hyper-masculine impulse which breathes in the spirit of this country and subsequently in the spirit of SA hip-hop. So for a rapper to come through and express her experiences like this is a moment where it's an opportunity to be a teachable moment, particularly to us men, to understand why it is that we keep drawing so many lines between us and women, why we think we're so different when there's so much that is the same. And saying dumb shit like women gossip a lot is bullshit, because so do men. Saying dumb shit like women are sensitive is bullshit, because so are men. The fact that we have to gender humanity in order for it to make sense to us is one of our greatest issues, and I think Static addresses these issues with the dexterity of a skilled rapper. Only thing that I really have that kind of irks me out about this project is that in her fighting for her hip-hop artistic integrity, Static carries her voice with a bravado that covers her clarity. A whole lot of times it's not necessarily the way she twangs the words, it's the way she brings them across with a nasal affectation which pushes more to her tone than the words. So she compromises the open clarity of what she's saying for this kind of, you know, rapper feel. And I think what that does is that it kills a lot of the messages in her music, because she brings you in, and just when you're hooked because she's addressing you in the common spirit of being human, you get lost because she still talks with bravado even in moments where she's talking about sensitive things. She still raps with bravado in moments where she's being extremely vulnerable. So this album has great emotional depth, but it's delivered monotonously, and it's delivered in a tone which actually even covers up her ability to be clear. So I think on a vocal level, Static needs to learn how to open up her vocal texture more and speak from a place where the words can be heard, because a lot of the times they're lost in the process of trying to deliver them with charisma and bravado. And I think this might be an expression of the fact that she's had to fight so much that she's always fighting on the mic. And this fighting on the mic is projected in the way that she chooses to use her voice. She's rapping in a way where she's always trying to command the listener. And there's songs which really the command can be captured without literally having to be vocally commanding. You can still be captivating and engaging without always carrying yourself in ways that feel like you're trying to literally bring people forcefully in to your message. So I think what this does is that it creates a dissonance with the beautiful broad sonic scope of this album, which goes into, again, the idea and the concept of dreaming. What does it mean to break every limit that's been set for you and still have the aspiration to reach your target goals? And this is a really beautiful project in its sentiment and in its thematics, but it doesn't get there because vocally StaticFlo is still in a place where, you know, the drawl kind of really covers up her clarity. So ultimately for me, the teachable moment Static is giving us in the form of a window into the feminine experience, understanding where and how gender fits into the context of hip-hop, how it affects the people who live in feminine bodies and want to navigate this world just by being themselves, but keep being reminded that they're women, and that supposedly means that they're inferior in some way. What this does is that ultimately the sonic texture of this album cannot really pull through and successfully make it something worth listening to in terms of its depth, because what I mean by that is the vocal ability of the MC is what ultimately drives the replay value. We're attracted to rappers by their ability to sound like they're talking directly to us with every emotional range, and they start feeling like close friends because they shout at us, they comfort us, they ease us, they are with us in times of fun. And I think where Static lacks is she's in this place where she's always trying to get your attention by being vocally abrasive and using a kind of delivery which ends up just falling on the words in ways that doesn't make them clear enough. So ultimately, IPHUPHA for me gotta be a solid 6 out of 10. Way beyond average, because what it does is that its intention is to tell a story. Its intention is to focus on the plight of women in hip-hop. Its story is to use StaticFlo as a case study for how women in South Africa who love rap, who love this culture, have been navigating their challenges, their ins and outs. This is truly an album where, out of the many projects that I've reviewed from women, it's one of my personal favorites because just like Zulu Mekas, it speaks from a place of confidence. It speaks from a place where it doesn't address the issue of femininity and anchor the art around it. It's truly just the story of a person who's expressing themselves and how they are living and where they want to go ultimately with their art. But because of the way that it's delivered vocally, it doesn't sit in ways that are able to truly match the musical diversity, because man, in terms of beats and the actual effort of this project, it goes into so many different corners. It goes into places that are clubby, it goes into places which are somewhat intimate, but ultimately StaticFlo's monotonous flow compromises the diversity of this album, and because of that I feel like it's also a teachable moment on her to work on broadening the vocal range, work on rapping in ways where you can fundamentally really be heard. Because I know the politics of accent and how we choose to sound a little American while still adopting who we really are, and just sometimes not realizing how deep our twanging goes into us not being heard at all. So I think for me this is also a moment that to talk about the politics of the human voice and how it really relates to hip-hop. Going back to the episode, rap how you speak, and I think Static doesn't rap the way she speaks in many of these songs, which is the reason why it doesn't feel as human as it could have felt, because her subject matter is deeply and intimately human, but her voice sounds very mechanical, very forced, and very driven in many instances. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is if that's the only trick that you have. You get me? So because it feels like that's basically the one lane that she does vocally, it makes her a one-trick pony who's able to deliver lyrics only in a certain kind of way. So and I think as an MC, can you truly be great if you cannot take your voice to the places where the subject matter demands? I don't think so. But the one thing I do know is that this is a solid project, and as I said, this is a moment for us to look at all of these gendered terms, to look at all of these old-fashioned beliefs that we still hold dear to, which oppress others, and rid them in the context of hip-hop. Because if hip-hop has been a form of social empowerment by remixing the past, then it also has very great lessons for us to learn how to navigate new masculinities, new femininities, and everything in between, which might not have a name yet, which might have a name that we resist right now. Everything. That's the beauty of music, and that's the beauty of this culture. Thank you to Static. I think with everything that she's achieved, and also being part of a podcast with Rashid K, in moving to Johannesburg and finding herself in a lane where you could easily drown, and yet there she is, holding her own amongst some of the most resilient players in the game. It shows us this. This is somebody who is going to make it at all costs. Whether she's a rapper or an entrepreneur behind the scenes, Static has dedicated herself to building hip-hop and building awareness around the experiences of women in hip-hop, and allowing us to see that ultimately it's all the same. It's all the same because it's coming from the human soul. Much love.